Focus.
What's up, everybody? I'm Adam Bennett, representing the Communications and Community Engagement team. Thank you for tuning in to today's Lunch Bites. Today, we are going to hear from Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Deana Dynis. She is going to share with you all things related to our gifted and talented services. Without further ado, here is Dr. Deana Dynis.
My name is Dr. Deana Dynis. I am the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning in the Coppell Independent School District. And it's my pleasure today to speak a little bit with you about the gifted services model we have in our school district and how I believe that that is meeting and in many places exceeding the requirements of House Bill 3. The first step we took in this iterative process was changing from a complete pull-out model at the elementary level where GT learners saw the gifted specialist for no more than 3 hours a week, and usually that was in one big block of time. No matter how they were identified, they all went with the GT specialist, to more of an RTI model. We really looked at what were our colleagues in intervention services doing, and we saw that Tier 1 instruction was for everyone. That's just good classroom instruction. Tier 2 was really about small group and targeted instruction, and Tier 3 really became more individualized. And we wondered, could we do that on the other end? And so we really started thinking about what we ended up calling response to instruction. And in all honesty, we weren't the only ones thinking that. And so you can see that our service design model really broke up our GT learners into tiers of service. Tier 2 learners were really getting differentiated intervention and instruction, sometimes designed and pushed in by the by the GT educator, sometimes just facilitated by the classroom educator as the GT specialist was planning and designing with him or her. And then at that Tier 3 level, that's where things became a lot more individualized, and that's where you might see acceleration. That's where you might see multi-age learning happening, and that would usually be in a pull-out situation with the gifted specialist. I also want to point out that that is often where we met their social emotional needs, as that is very individualized. And so this model really served us well for quite some time, but it was never intended to be the place where we ended up. It was a transition period from that, you're gifted, everybody come with me, and we're going to all do these things. And they were great things, by the way, but it didn't necessarily take into account your individual identity as a gifted learner and what your strengths and passions were, to kind of this more fluid model that I'm getting ready to show you. As we crossed into that first iteration of our new service model, as a district, we also started grounding our work in the tenets of a professional learning community. And when I say that, I'm really talking about being results-oriented and being data-driven and building a collaborative culture. And in our district, what that really came down to is starting to identify what are those high-priority learning standards at every grade level and every content that we're going to say learners in every school are going to learn these things. They will have mastery of these things, and these are the things that we're going to intervene on. That helped us as specialists understand where we might begin to think about applying the concepts of depth and complexity, acceleration, etc., when we had identified a common curriculum, a guaranteed and viable curriculum across all grade levels, across all campuses. The next step was really focusing on how are we going to know if learners know that. And again, for those of us in the gifted world, we really got excited about the opportunities around pre-assessment. That's where we could be really respectful of our learners as we identified what they already knew and how to provide then respectful work as a replacement for the work that they would have been doing had we had no way of discerning whether they knew that or not, right? Nobody signs up for more work, but it's certainly a good idea to look at how we can provide that replacement work when we have pre-assessed with our learners. The third question of a professional learning community is really around intervention for when a learner doesn't know the content, doesn't master the content as you teach it. We as gifted specialists don't spend a whole lot of time there, but I want to be really clear that we have learners who require intervention just as much as we have learners who really spend a great deal of their time in question 4, which is really about what are we going to do when they already know it. And I've alluded a little bit already to the fact that that's where we are going to extend their learning, provide replacement work that is respectful, and also it gives us the opportunity to really provide some enrichment for them, some things that maybe aren't standards in their grade level or even in that content area, but maybe it's passion driven, something that learners are interested in, and we can harness that and teach some other soft skills or some life ready skills during that time. Our current elementary GT service model, as you can see, is much more simplistic. It really is on that continuum based on the needs of the learners. There's classroom instruction, and obviously that's where our GT specialists have been working in conjunction with classroom educators to embed and design extension activities that are occurring as part of just the general education instruction. And then there's some real differentiation, and that may be a facilitated or a small group instruction happening in the classroom where the GT specialist has pushed in to support the classroom educator as he or she may be pulling small groups of learners who have not yet mastered the grade level content. And our specialists are there providing support and extension in the classroom. And then there's the potential for pull-out. And again, that's where you would see multi-age, multi-grade, social emotional learning, maybe some of that really deep enrichment that's so exciting for our learners. And it's all based on learners' needs. So we should be responding to their particular strengths. We may have a 3rd grade learner who is incredibly strong in math and science and is consistently pre-assessing and demonstrating mastery of that content. And then we are providing that academic extension for that learner in a variety of ways. Whereas in social studies and language arts, maybe that's just not an area of particular strength, and that learner is performing on grade level and or maybe from time to time requires a little bit of intervention. But it isn't our job to pigeonhole them, but instead to be very responsive and have our model be fluid. And you can imagine that requires a great deal of planning, but it's also created amazing partnerships with our classroom educators and our GT specialists as they are working together to provide support for our learners at all grade levels. I mentioned this before, and I think that this is incredibly important. Now more than ever, COVID has certainly shown us that we need to provide some really intentional social emotional support for our gifted learners. And so our gifted specialists in the Coppell Independent School District have sat down and really created a continuum of what those services might look like. And in each grade level, they've established a big idea, and you can see those in front of you with habits of a healthy mindset, what does it mean to be GT, all the way to kind of that capstone experience in 5th grade of building on your talents. And then we have some areas of focus underneath that we believe are in support of that big idea and provide a structure and a framework for us to provide that social emotional learning or that social emotional support. Now, I want to be clear that certainly we don't pigeonhole our learners. If a learner needs something that isn't in their grade level, we're not going to say, well, sorry, you'll get to learn that in 2nd grade. But it gives us a framework and a way to make sure that we're being really intentional about those supports we're providing. It also allows us to reach out to, in a timely and intentional manner, any other support staff that might need to help us as we work to channel learners' anxieties or intensities or their passions in a way that is productive and makes that learner feel fulfilled in their world. Our secondary GT services are also based on learners' needs, and they're fairly fluid. Middle school is the only place where we have only self-contained GT classes for GT learners. So once you leave the elementary school where we've been cluster grouping our learners and supporting them in a variety of ways, including all the things that you saw on the continuum, at middle school is where we would first have self-contained GT-only GT classes. And those are in the 4 core content areas: language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science. And for the 3 years of middle school, learners can enroll in the courses that they are particularly identified in. So if you're identified math or math science, then those are the GT courses you can take. If you are general intellectual ability, you can enroll in all of them, etc. That is an opportunity for us to really help learners begin to hone their strengths. Previously, we had found that learners could enroll in all GT courses regardless of their identification, and what we found were frustrations and some of the triggers that lead back to our now core value of redefining success. We had some pain points in the district around overload, where learners were signing up for everything, GT and otherwise, and we had a pain point of kind of the GPA rat race. And I'm sure you're all kind of familiar with learners working so very hard, sometimes at the detriment of their physical health, very often certainly at the detriment of their mental health, not being so well-rounded, not having some other outlets. And so we really worked towards those, and that is, again, the one place where learners are GT only, and they do not have to sign up for all the courses in the area that they're identified in. They can pick and choose, but they can't go outside their areas of identification. At the high school level, things open up again, and you find GT learners really in all kinds of classes. We have honors and GT classes again, and then we have AP and IB, and those courses are open enrollment. We do not require that learners apply to be part of those courses or have a certain GPA. If you're willing to work that hard, you absolutely can, and we encourage you to do that for the love of learning, and we'll provide some supports for you. In the classes, you would have learners who are cluster grouped based on identification, so that, again, we're meeting that requirement of the state plan where they are homogeneously and heterogeneously grouped at some point during the day. The other opportunities we have for our GT learners are project-based learning. We have a whole campus at the high school level that is their instructional methodology, and it's a pretty exciting place to be. You see kind of that real-world engagement and that real work happening day to day as learners work to solve real problems. And CTE instruction, as well as dual credit. All of those we believe to be rigorous pathways and very appropriate for our GT learners. In thinking about learner assessment, and this is pre-COVID, this is the way we went about identifying GT-ness, if you will. We really cast a wide net. We universally screen at kindergarten because that is required by the state plan, but also at 3rd grade and at 5th grade. I think it's important to say that at third grade, in particular, if you have been identified prior to 3rd grade, you will not be assessed again in 3rd. We will minimize the assessment as required by the state plan to only once, which means you would be assessed again in 5th grade. We find that to be particularly useful, again, to go back to what courses you might be taking as you step into your secondary education career. We look at least 3 data points, and we do not have a cut score for our standardized assessments. We really are looking at the whole child, and we combine those quantitative and qualitative data points to really get an idea of where do we need to dig even further to look for identification. That helps us a lot. As you looked at our demographics, we have a fairly linguistically diverse community, and we have a growing population of learners that are certainly at promise, but may need us to look a little bit differently at what GT-ness looks like in their world. We have parent referrals in the fall and in the spring for learners who are not universally screened, but it's important to note that our standardized tool that we use at those grade levels is valid for 2 years. And so we explained to a parent that, for example, if I moved to Capel in 2nd grade and I want my learner assessed for GT services, that learner would not then be assessed at 3rd grade because we would have a reliable and valid tool on hand, scores on hand for that learner. So they would not take the test again. We can still consider them if they didn't meet, if they were not identified in 2nd grade. We could certainly look at their scores again in 3rd grade along with some additional data points, but we're very careful about not assessing children over and over and over again. But having said that, I think it's also important to say that at any point, any professional in the school district can trigger an assessment for a learner who maybe their parent didn't refer them, but that professional with their 30 hours of training and 6-hour updates notices that there's something happening with that learner. There's some indicators of giftedness, whether it's a sophisticated sense of humor, whether it's a sophisticated vocabulary, whether it's a deep level of empathy, or as some of us know, that learner who has a very defined sense of justice. Those are all things that we can look at along with their academics, and an educator can trigger an assessment at any point. We utilize, like I said before, a lot of different assessment tools, and we kind of customize those to the needs of the learner as we are actively looking for giftedness. We have that wide net that we are casting, and we value our educators' input. They are trained professionals and they work with learners every single day. They know better than we do most of the time, and so we certainly want to value the input that they provide us, and we ask for it as part of our identification practices. When we think about professional learning, we are certainly blessed to have a school board and leadership that helps us prioritize gifted education. A rising tide lifts all ships. And so at the elementary level, all elementary classroom educators are required to have their 30 hours of gifted and talented training, and then they have to get the 6-hour update, and we do that through a lot of different venues. We have 2 modules that are offered in-house and are partially asynchronous, and then we have some seminars, meetings with the specialists or myself to discuss the learning. And then we leverage our partnership with our Educational Service Center to complete the rest of that training. This year, we have added a book study, again in support of our professional learning community philosophy, called When They Already Know It, and I've cited that in the presentation should you want to take a look at it, but we will kick that off in November as we start moving into that time frame when we've gotten past the October wall and we're ready to really dig into some learning to fill ourselves, and we're not balanced on the edge of the knife with curriculum nights and parent conferences and those kind of things. So in November, we will be launching that district-wide. I'm very excited about it. Our professional learning also includes updates for our counselors and administrators, because since our process is iterative, they need to be kept up to date with where we are. And then we have a gifted and talented committee, which is that group of individuals that is committed to helping us look at the data around the learners that we've been assessing and make decisions about learners who we are going to identify and those that we may need some additional assessment on, etc. And so those learners have those educators have an orientation every year to ground them in kind of their role and responsibilities as being part of that committee. I will just share with you personally that one of the things I love about our GTCs is I see them as the committee on campus that looks at learners through the lens of what they can do. They have an awful lot of data, and they are not looking through the lens of deficit, but through the lens of strength. And it's my hope that someday that's the most powerful campus committee, where those educators know an awful lot about what our learners are capable of doing, and that we use that information consistently in every classroom, whether a learner is identified or not, to meet their needs. That would be my dream. We have some really neat podcasts that we have been using as part of our 6-hour update. We know that that is a medium that is easily accessible to many of our educators as they are on their commute or have a few minutes here or there. It gives them the opportunity to multitask. And so we worked with our director of professional learning, and we came up with a way for our educators to reflect on the learning from those podcasts in their bold portfolios, and then I can award credit for those 6 hours. I have to give a big shout out to our director of professional learning, who also works with me ahead of big district professional learning days or conferences that we have in the summer to indicate which sessions being offered would be eligible for GT credit on the front end without educators having to take the additional step in our system of requesting credit for a session that maybe they took outside of or inside of the district. It has really streamlined our practices and really reinforced the importance of gifted professional learning. And that has been a real benefit to us, particularly since we require so many of our educators to have those 30 hours and then their updates. And then this year, in support of that, redefining success core value and our belief that CTE, or career and technology education courses, are a rigorous pathway. We are spending 6 hours with our CTE educators to really talk to them about the nature and needs of gifted learners and some of those intensities that they may see as their learners are passion driven. I think that sometimes those needs go unrecognized, not because the educators don't want to, but they don't have the experience to recognize and they don't have the training to recognize it. And so that this year, that is something that we are going to provide professional learning on.
We now have people standing by to answer all of your questions